So you've decided that you're going to make something ridiculously epic, and when you get home to start it, you sit down and you realize you have no idea where to start. Welcome in, everyone. My name is Matt, Cryptic, whatever you'd like to call me. Today I'm going to tell you about a little known process that some people tend to forget, other people tend to ignore, but you shouldn't skip it, you shouldn't ignore it, because it's actually very important to the entire process of building out a 3D model. When it comes to creating in 3D, it doesn't really matter where the content came from, where the idea came from. This process is pretty much universal when it comes to working off of concept art or something you just came up with in your head. This is kind of the first start of any project that you really need to nail down and establish kind of the skeleton structure of what it is that you're really building. Because I get it, we all sit down, we have this idea that we're just going to chip away at something until it starts to look good or, you know, pleasing to the eye. But the reality is that we kind of get stuck when there's just no scaffold to start with. There's nothing there. And you look at all the detail that you have to put into this model and you're like, crap, where do I actually start? And this process is called blocking. Blocking is so important because as you start building your model, you need to have a good outline of what it is you're going to be working with. Whether or not that's a drawing or a concept art, you need to be able to somehow convert that into 3D space in a way that gives you a basic layout, a basic sculpture that you can start to work with and start to manipulate. Because in the end, if you start off and you start trying to add all this little detail off the get-go, you're going to screw up your model later down the road. You're going to add too much detail in one space, or you're not going to plan properly for the final portions of model making, which would be UVing, texturing, lighting, rendering, all of that. You are setting yourself up for failure by ignoring this process. And a lot of the time the question is like, why would you skip such an important process? Or I already do that because it's just natural to me. A lot of people tend to skip it just because it's a basic concept. A lot of people will think, no, I don't need to do that. I can just build my model. Because, you know, I used to be the same way. I would skip this process because I just thought, no, I don't need that. Why would I need to do that? That just seems like a waste of my time. I can just build a piece and start adding detail, and then build another piece and start adding detail and just go from there. And the reality is I've been doing it wrong for years, and I don't know, maybe you've been doing it wrong for years. So hopefully this video kind of helps you realize what it is you're missing out on and what it is you should be doing in the future to better proof your models for the final stages of the creation process. Okay, so what we're doing here, for this example, I chose a Halo ODST Pistol because I didn't want to go through the whole process of finding a concept artist and going through all this. So I figured I'd use something that's probably relatable. Basically what you're going to do throughout this whole process is you're going to start developing the basic shape of your model. This is super important because this is going to be your scaffold when you're building the final model, when you're adding detail. One thing to remember here that's super important is that you're not stressing the little details. You're not getting all of the little nooks and crannies, because that's going to be your second pass on the model. You're going to really start refining the shape, attaching things. Blocking is really just so you can get your main skeleton built, designed, and good to go. There's really no concern here with making things more complicated than they need to be. So as you can see, I'm just taking this model, I'm basically scaling everything out, making sure some of the edges line up, the basic general shape is getting there. I'm also trying to establish what it is that needs to be extruded from the main piece of the body of the pistol, and what needs to actually be a main separate piece. And some of these pieces I'll decide whether or not I want them to start off separate, and then later on down the line I will merge them with the model. This is kind of what's great about blocking, is you're always going to have that shape available. And then what I'll like to do is when I start adding detail to my model, I will save another format of this or another file and then work off of a newer file. That way I always have my blocking saved if I need to pull an original piece, or if I deleted something I shouldn't have that I can't get back for some reason. It's always good to have every single stage of your model saved in pieces. I think by the time I'm done with the model, I'll have about 5 to 10 revision files. That just gives me some peace of mind with backups, as well as gives me some movement room with deleting and adding new things or removing pieces that I didn't need before. This you'll see right here, I'm adding the first what I consider external piece to the body, which is the trigger. The reason I didn't put this into the blocking is because in the end, this will be a separate piece. Like if I were making this model for production or whatever, you would theoretically want that trigger to be able to move. If you have a character that's going to be pulling that trigger close to screen, whatever the use case is, I would want it to be a separate piece. That way it's something that you can actually establish and work with down the line to animate and rig. And really here, all I'm doing is, again, focusing on scale and making sure that the silhouette of the model matches the original design of the model. I like to tend to think of this when I'm doing this is like, how many pieces do I need? So I'm going to establish, like, do I need all of these separate pieces, or can this all be one chunk? When you start working all in one chunk, it's a little messy. You'll end up creating faces in places you didn't want them. I tend to take some of the more complex shapes like this handle guard, and I'll make it separate, because later down the line, it's just going to be quads that have to be merged together. It's not going to be a real big deal. And again, one of the big focuses here is just making sure the edges are flowing properly. Again, I'm not looking for extreme detail here. I'm making sure that each and every edge loop matches up with the actual shape of the object. I'm not trying to perfect any details. That'll come later. But right now, it's just making sure that when you look at this, you can go, okay, that's what that is. That's what I'm working towards. It's, to me, an extraordinarily important part of the process of model making, especially with like hard surface modeling, because in the end, like if you're going to build, say, a spaceship, you don't want to start building the bridge and designing everything and then leaving the spaceship as nothing and then just having to figure that out and go and go and go. Your process is going to be so much longer if you don't have a general idea of the full mass and shape of that actual design. And again, here we're just adding some extra pieces. These are the laser sight and the flashlight. These are just going to be separate objects that have very low detail to them. I do try to add some things like the little circular points. And you'll see here, I totally ignored that. You need to extrude that first, but that's okay. It's, again, just general shaping. There's no real focus here on like heavy detail. Another thing that you really don't need to focus on too much right now is edge flow. You're going to have some weird edges. You're going to have some weird things that don't look right. You're going to be able to clean that up later. The important thing, again, is just this general shaping process, because this is your skeleton of your model, and this is going to kind of carry you through the entire design process. Like, I don't necessarily like that I left this that way. I'd go back and clean that up. Just because adding these offset edge loops here is going to probably add some issues down the line if I don't clean that up immediately. So it's just kind of pre-planning and thinking about the design of your model that's going to be really, really important down the line. And then here, not really worrying about how this actually connects, because when you're talking about the mechanical details of how these things connect to that, it's probably using things like a Picatinny rail. Those are that's something that we don't really necessarily need to add immediately. It's just finite details that'll get added later. And I'll like to pull out the shapes a little bit just to kind of establish, like, yes, this is like more of a rounded three-dimensional object. I will close in the hand grips a bit just to make it look more hand grip-ish and less blocky. Again, just kind of feeding to the vision of what you're working on. Because even though you're not adding a lot of detail here, it's really important to make sure that the detail you do add is going to help guide you in the future of the model, as well as making sure things are actually lining up properly. Because if they're not lining up properly, you're going to have a lot of issues, especially the magazine. Like, you'll get an awkward looking model if, say, the edges are off. This is where working with concept art becomes kind of difficult, because especially if you don't have all angles of the concept art. For instance, this pistol, all I have is the side. That's all I'm working with. So everything else is going to be kind of left up to interpretation, unless I can later down the line find more concept art, since I don't have an artist for this that can just design me something. This is very much something that I'd have to find on my own. Even though this seems like a process that probably could have been ignored, I wanted to get it added in there just because I wanted to make sure that the edge flow was working for me. This is kind of a weird shape. It's like a rubber bumper, I'm guessing, on the bottom of the magazine. I wanted to make sure that I had that geometry in place, because when it does come down to modeling the magazine, it's just going to save me time in the long run. And then the last little bit here is just adding a barrel. I didn't need to do this. I don't even know if there really is a barrel on there. Like, I know there physically is a barrel on there, but I don't know what it looks like from the front. So that'll be a detail I have to find later. But all in all, that is how you block out a model. So that's it. You've blocked out your model. You have this horrible silhouette looking thing of the picture that you are working off of. Now from here is where you should really start to look at refining shapes, adding in some of those edge details, whereas like the slide itself sits above the main chamber of the gun. You'd want to start adding those indents and really digging into the model and starting to shape it. Remember, you're starting from scratch here, so you're just kind of working up to your different detail levels. You don't want to start too high detailed too quickly. If you start too high detailed too quickly, you're going to mess yourself up in the long run. It's best now just to focus on supporting edges, working in the actual shape of the pistol, whereas like the curves match up with the body or where bodies taper off. It's super important to start really working in those areas. This is also where you're going to start really paying attention to edge flow, because in the end you want this to match up and you want this to look like a logical thing, because again, as you go down the process, and I can't stress this enough because I used to make these mistakes all the time, you want to make sure your edges are concise and visible and easy to navigate, because when you get to the UVing stage, especially with hard surface modeling, it can mess you up. You want to make sure you are focusing on getting those details in, because without those details, your topology is going to get messed up. You're going to be sad, and it's going to lead to a lot of frustration. So I really hope this video helped you in some way, because as artists, we can get a little lost in the process, and sometimes we never really even had a process to begin with. And part of what I want to do here is introduce people to processes they maybe didn't know existed, or processes that I've discovered that I didn't know existed. I thought it was a fairly light but super helpful topic, so I hope you did too. I used to ignore this entire step for years until recently. I get that it's a little extra step and a lot of people just want to get to the nitty-gritty and get something that you can post online, but it's something that is super hyper important to really focus on in the beginning, because you're setting yourself up for success in the long run. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a like. If you didn't, let me know why you didn't, because that's always helpful too. Leave a comment if there's something that you would like me to talk about, a new topic, anything like that, and I will see you all in the next one.